Imagine standing at the edge of a timber scaffold 60 feet above frozen earth, your fingers cracked and bleeding, the wind cutting through your coat like a blade. Below you, 100 men move like ants across a sea of mud and stone. Horses strain against loads that would buckle iron. Somewhere beneath you, a rope snaps. A stone block the size of a cartwheel swings free. Men scatter, shouting. The foreman's whistle screams across the site. And when the dust settles, the work continues. It never stops. Because somewhere inside a warm drawing room, a wealthy man has unrolled a set of architectural drawings and pointed to a line on paper. And that line must become reality, no matter the cost. This is the hidden world behind Victorian mansions. Not the gleaming ballrooms or the portraits hanging in gilded frames. The real story. The dangerous, exhausting, astonishing story of how these monuments to ambition were actually built. Stay until the end, because what historians rarely describe is more extraordinary than anything the finished facades suggest. By the 1840s, Britain's industrial wealth had created a new class of men hungry to announce their arrival in stone and mortar. Industrialists, railway magnates, cotton mill owners, men who had never inherited land but had earned fortunes faster than any aristocrat could comprehend. They hired architects, sometimes the finest in England, and together they drew up plans for estates of staggering scale. Dozens of bedrooms, service wings, stables, orangeries, formal gardens requiring their own small armies to maintain. The drawings were meticulous, produced with ink and compass on drafting tables in London offices, then rolled into leather tubes and dispatched by carriage to estates in Yorkshire, Shropshire, or the Surrey Hills. Before a single stone was lifted, months of planning had already been consumed. But paper and ambition are weightless. Stone is not. The first challenge every Victorian construction crew faced was the ground itself, waterlogged, stubborn, indifferent to human ambition. Teams of navvies, the same rough-handed labourers who had cut Britain's canal and railway networks into existence, were hired to break the earth. They worked with picks and shovels in conditions that would be unrecognisable today. No mechanical diggers, no drainage pumps beyond hand-operated devices. Just men, tools, and will, excavating foundations sometimes 15 feet deep to anchor walls against the heaving clay. Subscribe for more forgotten historical stories like this one. The labour that built the Victorian world deserves to be remembered. Once foundations were secured with rubble fill and hydraulic lime mortar, a cement-like compound that could set even in damp conditions, the real architecture began to rise. Stone was king. In regions where local quarries produced good sandstone or limestone, entire teams of quarrymen worked months in advance of the main site, cutting blocks to the architect's specified dimensions. Each block was shaped by hand. Masons wielding chisels and pitching tools dressed the faces of stone with a rhythm so practiced it became almost musical. Strike, rotate, producing the smooth ashlar faces that give Victorian mansions their air of grave authority. The weight of these blocks defied easy comprehension. A single dressed stone for a window surround might weigh 500 pounds. Transporting it from quarry to site required horse-drawn wagons with iron-rimmed wheels that sank into country roads with every rain. Horses died from overwork. Axles splintered. Loads shifted, and men were crushed. The foreman's ledger on a major Victorian mansion project recorded accidents with a casualness that chills the modern reader. Not because the Victorians were unfeeling, but because injury was so routine it required no particular comment. A broken arm, a man struck by a falling header, a carpenter's apprentice fallen from an upper floor. The work continued. Comment below what surprised you most about these working conditions. While masons cut stone, brickmakers laboured in their own particular misery nearby. Many estates required millions of bricks. Not imported, but made on site from local clay. Workers would excavate clay, puddle it with water, press it into wooden moulds, and set the green bricks out to dry before firing them in temporary kilns called clamps. The heat from a burning clamp was extraordinary, and the brickmakers who tended them worked in a near-constant haze of smoke and dust. These bricks formed the inner cores of walls, hidden behind the handsome stone faces, but structurally essential. The skeleton beneath the skin. The carpentry required to build a Victorian mansion was itself a separate universe of skill. Timber yards adjacent to construction sites hummed with the sound of pit saws. Two-man teams working reciprocating blades through massive oak trunks to produce the floor joists, roof timbers, and structural beams the building demanded. The smell of fresh-cut timber mixed with sawdust and mud was the permanent scent of any Victorian building site. Carpenters and joiners were among the most respected tradesmen on site, responsible not only for structural timber, but for the complex decorative woodwork, the carved balusters, the panelled doors, the coffered ceilings, that would define the mansion's interior grandeur. Like the video if you enjoy immersive historical documentary storytelling that brings these craftsmen back to life. Blacksmiths operated their own forges on larger sites, producing the ironwork that Victorian architecture demanded in abundance. Decorative railings, structural tie rods holding walls against lateral spread, hinges for doors weighing several hundred pounds, window frames for the great bay windows that flooded Victorian interiors with light. A good Victorian blacksmith could work 10 hours in the heat of a forge, shaping iron with hammer and anvil, producing components that would outlast everyone who handled them. Much of that ironwork still exists today, silently bearing loads it was designed to carry a century and a half ago. The construction timeline for a significant Victorian mansion stretched across years, sometimes half a decade. Through every season, the work continued. Rain turned the site to a swamp. Frost cracked freshly laid mortar, forcing masons to start entire courses again. Summer brought its own hardships: dust, thirst, the relentless pressure of a wealthy client eager to occupy his investment. Foremen moved between trades like conductors of a difficult orchestra, balancing the competing demands of stonemasons waiting on timber deliveries, carpenters waiting on ironwork, plasterers waiting on dry walls. Coordination was accomplished entirely by human judgment, by experience, by the hard-won understanding of men who had spent their lives on sites like this one. Inside the rising walls, plasterers followed close behind the masons, applying lime and horsehair render in multiple coats to achieve the smooth interior surfaces that decorators would later adorn. Specialist craftsmen arrived in the later stages, the wood carvers producing the elaborate overmantels and decorative friezes that wealthy clients specified from pattern books, the tile setters laying encaustic tiles in entrance halls, the painters grinding their own pigments and applying them in thin layers to create the deep, jewel-like finishes that Victorian interiors demanded. Each of these men brought years of apprenticeship to a single building, contributing a piece of skill that the finished mansion would silently contain forever. And behind all of it, financing, approving, occasionally visiting the muddy site in a good coat and impractical shoes, stood the wealthy patron. He had spent years accumulating the capital required. The total cost of a substantial Victorian mansion, including grounds and outbuildings, could equal the annual income of a small county. Some patrons bankrupted themselves in the pursuit of stone ambition. Others completed their estates and died before the wallpaper was fully dry. A few lived to grow old in rooms that cost other men their health, their fingers, sometimes their lives. What we walk through today when we visit these houses, the long galleries, the vaulted kitchens, the bedroom corridors that stretch beyond comfortable sight, is not merely architecture. It is the compressed labor of thousands of human lives. It is the echo of chisels in cold morning air. It is the weight of stone moved by men who left no portraits behind them, whose names appear in no guidebook, whose only monument is the building itself. Victorian mansions were not built by wealth alone. They were built by skill, by endurance, by a kind of physical courage that the finished product entirely conceals. The grandeur was always purchased at a price the grand rooms never mention. That is the real construction secret behind every one of them, and now you know it.